Hey, what's going on? APUSH Peeps. We have Key Concept 8.1 for you today. This is the revised edition, the most up-to-date video you will find on Key Concept 8.1. This is it. Only 5 more videos after this. Now, before we begin at shout-out time, I want to give shout-outs to Mr. Cruz's class in Virginia, Ms. Munoz's class in Chicago, Mr. Picardi's class in California, and Dr. Tyrell's class in Ohio. Thank you all so much for the support. I do appreciate it. If you want your teacher to get a shout-out, you have 5 videos left to get in, so leave it in the comments, and I will do my best to get to it. All right, Key Concept 8.1 states, the United States responded to an uncertain and unstable post-war world by asserting and working to maintain a position of global leadership with far-reaching domestic and international consequences. So some big idea questions you should be able to answer by the end of this video are, what were different ways the U.S. sought to contain communism, both domestically and abroad? How did independence movements throughout the world affect the Cold War? And how did the Vietnam War impact domestic life? Very important topics, which you will be an expert on. All right, let's take a look at Roman numeral 1. It says United States policymakers engaged in a Cold War with the authoritarian Soviet Union, seeking to limit the growth of communist military power and ideological influence, create a free market global economy, and build an international security system. In other words, to stop the Soviet Union from becoming too powerful. Now, letter A states, the wartime alliance between the Soviet Union and the Allies dissolved. Keep in mind, the Soviet Union, the US, France, Great Britain all fought on the same side during World War II, but once that war was over, the alliance disappeared. And the US will develop a foreign policy based on collective security, or security for a big group of people. And you see this through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which was created by the US and its allies like Great Britain and France. And this was created in an effort to limit the power of the Soviet Union. And if one country was attacked in NATO, it was as if they all were attacked. We also have international aid, whether it's the Marshall Plan, which provided billions of dollars to Europe to rebuild the continent that was just destroyed during World War II, or the Truman Doctrine, which pledged $400 million in military aid to Greece and Turkey. So the U.S. is going to provide lots of money to European countries to improve their economies and hopefully make communism and the Soviet Union less appealing. Also, economic institutions were created that bolstered non-communist nations. You see things like the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, which was created in 1944. And this organization hopes to promote trade and provide loans to countries in need. So there's different ways the U.S. tried to limit the appeal of communism. So the U.S. is going to contain communism through a variety of measures. Now, definitely know this term containment. It was coined by this dude, George F. Kennan. He is really the father of containment. Here's an interesting fact. Dude lived to be 101 years old. He died on March 17th, 2005. 101 years old. That dude's a champ. So he created this term containment and urged the United States to basically keep communism from spreading. You can't really stop it from existing, but you can keep it from spreading. And this is really going to be the idea that will influence wars like Korea and Vietnam. And this goes along with the domino theory that if one country were to become communist, then other countries would be as well. We also have massive retaliation, and this is the idea that the U.S. would respond with more force if attacked. And I like to call this the Ron Burgundy method. You know, that escalated quickly if you've ever seen Anchorman. The idea that if the U.S. were to get attacked, they would respond in even more force than they were attacked with. And then you also see trying to contain communism through the space race. So this is a reaction to Sputnik, the satellite that was launched in outer space. And this dude, Yuri Gagarin, the first human to ever orbit outer space. And he did so on April 12th. What happened on April 12th? Oh my God, it's Henry Clay's birthday. Happy birthday to Henry Clay. Dude just keeps coming back. So the U.S. is going to begin a space race with the Soviet Union to try to show that the U.S. is technologically advanced as well. So they will build up their space program and pour a lot of money into education in the United States to try to make themselves on par with the Soviet Union when it comes to outer space. Okay, so the Cold War, it will fluctuate between direct and indirect military confrontation. So we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it's 13 days in October 1962 in which the U.S. found missiles in Cuba only 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This is the closest the U.S. and Soviet Union ever came to war. And I do have a detailed video on the Cold War in Cuba, as well as the the Vietnam War and the Korean War in the description, so make sure you check them out. Then we have détente. Know this term, it's specifically mentioned. This is easing of tensions between superpowers. An example of this is the SALT treaties, or the Strategic Arms Limitation talks, which then turned into treaties. And this began with Nixon's administration and continued through Carter. So in the late 1970s, you see this. And this was an agreement. These were agreements to limit certain types of nuclear weapons. What we'll see after World War II is there's this huge decolonization movement in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. A lot of countries are going to be giving up their overseas colonies. The U.S. will even give independence to the Philippines. So with these countries now becoming independent, the U.S. and the Soviet Union will seek allies among these new nations. And many of them are just going to want to remain neutral. So, for instance, in May of 1948, when Israel was created, the U.S. recognized Israel almost immediately. Any revolution, the U.S. kind of looked at it as if they were pawns of the Soviet Union. The Cold War will also be felt in Latin America, in which the U.S. will support non-communist regimes with varying levels of commitment to democracy. So pretty much the idea of the U.S. is they would support almost any type of government as long as they weren't communist. So in 1954, the CIA helped overthrow the democratically elected leader Arbenz in Guatemala because he nationalized land owned by the United Fruit Company. Now, you'll hear a lot in this time period, period 8, of nationalizing. What that means is the government is going to take land from companies and it now belongs to them. So the U.S. will be concerned that that sounds a little too much like communism. So Arbenz is going to be overthrown and he will be replaced with a military dictator, Armas. Let's go to Roman numeral 2. Cold War policies led to public debates over the power of the federal government and acceptable means for pursuing international and domestic goals while protecting civil liberties. So there will be debates over methods to root out domestic communists. And this will be especially true in the late 1940s, early 1950s. So President Truman, he'll issue an executive order 9835. This was a loyalty oath for federal employees. So all federal employees had to pledge loyalty to the United States and confirm that they were not communists. Late 1940s, early 1950s, we have the second Red Scare. This happens after World War II, just like the first Red Scare happened after World War I. So an example of the second Red Scare is HUAC in the Hollywood 10. HUAC stands for the House Committee of Un-American Activities, in which the House of Representatives would call hearings and investigate suspected communists or people they thought might be communists. And the Hollywood 10 was a group of Hollywood producers and directors who were called before HUAC and refused to testify. McCarthyism is in the late 1940s, early 1950s as well. He was a senator from Wisconsin in which he claimed to have known the names of many communists that infiltrated the State Department, and here he is giving a speech, and look at this poor guy. He is like, what am I doing here? What is going on? He's scared. And both political parties, they supported containing the threat of communism. So Eisenhower will support this in Iran when the leader Mossadegh is overthrown and replaced for the Shah of Iran, and in Guatemala, which we just talked about with Arbenz being overthrown. And Truman will send troops to Korea to fight in order to stop the spread of communism in Korea, and LBJ will do the same in Vietnam as well. So domestic opposition to wars. There was some with the Korean War, but not really much at all. We'll see with the Vietnam War, the longer it drags on, the more passionate the protests became, and even some violence accompanied with them. So in 1968, in January 1968, the Vietnamese New Year, that we have the Tet Offensive, which is when the North Vietnamese communists attacked the South. And for a long time, the U.S. government kept telling America, we're winning this war, the war will be over, we're doing a great job. And this surprised many people that the North Vietnamese were able to have such a large surprise attack on the South and the Americans. So this was really a turning point in the Vietnam War in which many people began to protest more. So we see groups like the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS. They used violence as time went on to protest. And in May 1970, at Kent State in Ohio, we have students protesting. This was a reaction to the U.S. bombing Cambodia. And here is a map of the shooting that happened at that campus, in which 4 Kent State students were killed by the Ohio National Guard. All right, so Americans began to debate as time went on the merits of a large nuclear arsenal. The U.S. and Soviet Union had so many nuclear weapons that they could destroy the world several times over. In Eisenhower's farewell address, he warned of what he called the military-industrial complex, which is the buildup of military and industries throughout the United States. And he cautioned that the U.S. could be spending lots of money and be in a perpetual state of ready for war. And here's Eisenhower. So the power of the executive branch in foreign and military policy will increase drastically as well during this time, and many Americans begin to debate whether or not that is a good thing. So Congress will reverse the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution with the War Powers Act. And the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution essentially gave LBJ a blank check to escalate the conflict in Vietnam as much as he saw necessary. And the War Powers Act will limit the ability of the president to send troops in combat without consulting with Congress. So the U.S. involvement in the Middle East was shaped by ideological, military, and economic concerns. In 1956, the Suez Crisis occurs, in which Nasser of Egypt, he nationalized, there's that word nationalize again, the Suez Canal, and Britain and France attacked Egypt. They were upset because they had control of the canal. The U.S. helped end the conflict because they were afraid that the Soviets would get involved and that Egypt might side with the Soviet Union. We have a series of oil crises that help initiate attempts at creating a national energy policy. This is something that's even true today with oil. We are still very much dependent on it. And the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, was created by mostly Middle Eastern countries, and they hope to control the supply of oil. And there's the flag for OPEC. And after the U.S. supported Israel in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War, OPEC placed an oil embargo on the U.S., which drastically raised gas prices, and you would see very long lines at gas stations. All right, some test tips for 8.1. For multiple choice and short answer, know that the ways that the U.S. sought to contain communism, whether it's the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Marshall Plan, Truman Doctrine, definitely be able to explain those. What the heck is détente? And the military-industrial complex. Who is that associated with, and what does it mean? For essay questions, World War II as a turning point for U.S. foreign policy could be huge, because now the U.S. is heavily involved in foreign affairs. Bye-bye George Washington's farewell address. And also comparing and contrasting post-World War I with post-World War II. The U.S. reverted back to isolationism after World War I, but they are anything but isolated after World War II. All right, look forward to seeing you back here for Key Concept 8.2, in which we will see this very, very influential lawyer and future Justice of the Supreme Court. I thank you guys very much for watching. Best of luck on all of your tests, especially the one in May, and have a good day.